Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast, formerly Amanda's Wellbeing podcast. This podcast is dedicated to health and well-being and features interviews with experts in the fields of nutrition, physical and mental health, and my 5-minute food fact series. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host, a lawyer turned nutritionist. I have a deep curiosity about living a healthy, active and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, and sharing what I learn with you on this podcast. Before I introduce today's guest, I will note that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat, cure or prevent injuries or medical conditions, and it is never a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today I am here with Karen McCall. Karen is the founder of the Financial Recovery Institute and the creator of a money management program called Money Grit. Karen went from dodging calls from the IRS, the equivalent of which is the ATO here in Australia, to helping thousands of people get out of debt and build a life and business they love. She has spent the last 30 years working with individuals and business owners to help them build a positive relationship with money. As you know, Vibrant Lives podcast is focused on well-being, and in general, I interviewed people about nutrition, exercise and movement, and mental health. So today's interview can be seen as somewhat of a departure from that, but the more time I spent thinking about our topic today, which is financial well-being and relationships around money, the more I thought that financial well-being can be intimately connected to our overall health, and in particular, I would say, to our mental well-being, because lack of financial well-being or financial security can be an overwhelming source of stress. I would say that just about every adult on this planet, apart from a very privileged few, have at some point in their lives experienced financial stress, whether it stems from not having enough money to meet their final obligations or from overcommitting themselves financially. And so that is why I think Karen's story is a really important one to share, and more than that, she offers solutions. Karen explains how certain beliefs about money and relationships with money can drive self-defeating behaviour. People can find themselves in a situation where spending money is like an addiction, and it just serves to amplify their problems with debt, and that can lead on to self-esteem and all sorts of other impacts relating to well-being. But the good news is there is a way out, and that is what Karen will be sharing with us today. Hi, Karen.
Hello, Amanda.
Welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast. Thank you very much for coming on as a guest today. It's a real pleasure to have you, and you're based in, is it San Francisco?
Well, I was in San Francisco most of my life, but my husband and I are settling in the Northwest in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, how nice. Karen, can you please share with us your financial story?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'll just turn the clock back to the mid-1980s, and I was divorced, and I had 2 daughters who'd gone off to college, and I had a fairly substantial amount in my divorce settlement.
Mm-hmm.
And I just stuck my head in the sand and went through that money, just pretended like, hey, it's going to last forever.
Yeah.
Not at all understanding that the fact that I had no clue on how to handle money. And it was just my very big secret. And I eventually went to work. I went to work in San Francisco and for one of the largest computer companies in the world. Beautiful office in San Francisco, big glass round building. And if you'd have seen me, you would have thought, wow, this woman is really a success. But behind that impressive looking facade, I had a dirty little secret. And that was that I was on the verge of being evicted. And I had IRS debt that I was just kind of ignoring and putting all my bills in a big bowl on top of my refrigerator. So that's what my life was like back in the early to mid 80s.
Well, that's really interesting because, there's so much to unpack there, but let's start with, you mentioned your facade and how you looked like the consummate professional. You had a great job, you had the right clothes, a sports car, you lived in a nice place. why do you think at that time it was important to you to look that way and to have the outward signs of success?
I just think because my self-esteem was really impacted by the fact that, down deep, there was this secret that I had, that I didn't know anything about money, that I was
Mhm.
living, at that point, I did have to find a different living situation. And I just kept it a big secret from everyone. It was a way to make myself feel better and just kind of pretend, live in denial and
Yeah.
pretend like it really wasn't going on. But it really took a toll on my health, on my self esteem, psychologically, but also physically. It really impacted me.
So what was that like for you? You say that you hit rock bottom. You don't have to share everything with us, obviously, but just tell us a little bit how you felt.
Well, the way I felt was once I, the night came that I decided that I really needed to pull that bull down and look at all my bills and really, start facing
Mhm.
reality. And what I felt was, well, I was listening to some audio tapes at that time by Dr. Robert Schuller, Possibility Thinking. And so, again, I think one of the things that I always tried to do to minimize my pain was to take optimism to kind of the other extreme, right? And so I looked for solutions. And at the time, we didn't have Google. We had
Yeah.
the yellow pages.
Yes. Mhm.
And I looked in the yellow pages, and there were financial planners, and there were accountants, and there were budget counselors, but there was nothing in between. And so I tried budget counseling, but it didn't work for me because they just wanted to take my paycheck, pay my bills, give me a little bit of allowance, and send
Right.
me on my way. And it just wasn't effective. It didn't last more than probably 1 or 2 months.
Yeah, it sounds like it didn't actually address the problem in terms of how you understood money and managed it. So you have turned your life around, which is what we are going to talk about. But so how did you do that and who helped you?
I did reach out for help. And one of the things I did is I started going to see a therapist. I also found a 12-step program that had some help with money.
Hmm.
And I did start talking about it, starting to come out of my isolation and denial. And so all of that was very helpful. And what it did for me, though, is as I decided that I really needed to design a very different life for myself and get smart with money, I realized that there were probably a lot of people like me
Yeah.
who had never, they were caught in that gap between the budget counselors and financial people. And so I started having this idea that this might be something I wanted to do. I was working in corporate America, and everybody thought, hey, that's so great. But the reality was that I felt depressed. I started really having stomach problems. So I also went to a nutritionist at that time. And so as I started dealing with some of my health issues, I started thinking more clearly.
Hmm.
So I was getting help from an emotional and physical and spiritual, so kind of
Yeah.
that confluence of all three really, really changed my life.
Well, that's very interesting because the crux of what we'll be talking about today is the relationship between how people deal with and think about money and well-being. So as you say, you needed all those aspects to heal your relationship with money and your health. You did touch on this, but what was it that made you want to help other people struggling with financial issues?
I think from the time I was a little girl, I've always been drawn to helping people. And it just, as I was gaining some insight
Mhm.
to what was going on with me, just this realization, I cannot be the only person. And so I started helping some friends, and I just saw how it started changing their life. And I mean, gosh, by 1988, I started financial recovery.
Mhm.
So it was just a deep desire to make a difference in people's lives.
Wow, and really the thing is, it is such a tangible difference, isn't it? And
Mhm.
I imagine, look, I don't know this is a fact, but it could be very difficult for women who are in a similar situation to you, where perhaps they were married, and traditionally the male would often look after the finances. I mean, not
Yeah.
always, but if that was the case, and then you find yourself divorced, and you've really not dealt with it before, how do you know what to do? It's tricky. So that's, obviously where you come in. And you said you struggled to find the right help. If you're struggling with debts, you're not going to go and see a financial advisor because that's not the person you need. They're the people that help you when you have money and you want to invest it. The debt person that helped you didn't really address the mental health side of the issue. So you are now a money coach, which is different from an accountant or a financial advisor. So what is the difference?
Well, and when I started my business, I called it financial recovery, and I called myself a financial recovery counselor. And then the term, after a few years of money coach, it was something that people are much more comfortable with. But when I was working with people, I was working with individuals and families. And what was different is, like you said, the financial planners help you grow your wealth. Accountants, their main focus is tax planning, estate planning, that type of thing. And so, the focus of this was to help people learn and get strong with money today, about their life today. And one of the things that was really impactful, and I think one of the contributors to my business taking off right from the beginning, is that I really started focusing on the numbers. For sure, you have to work with the numbers. But you have to really begin to see what the numbers are telling you. And if we think about healthy thinkers, they have a thought process where they try to make a decision about something. They can connect the consequences and then make the appropriate decision. And that can be a few minute process, or it could be a few weeks or months if it's a bigger purchase. But people like me, what we did was split off the consequences. So,
I see.
It's like, oh, I want to do this, but no impact in terms of, I'll just completely divorce the consequences. And that creates a lot of problems, and particularly with people who use a lot of credit cards, and particularly if they use credit cards and are spending more than they can afford to spend, they split off the consequence of, I've got to pay for that purchase. We have two motivators, pain and pleasure. So the pleasure of buying something and then splitting off the pain for paying for it is one of the things that can cause people to get in a lot of trouble with money.
Yeah. And as you say, you were in denial. So you just throw all your bills into the bowl and kind of forget about them. Yes, I can see how that could happen to someone. And so, Karen, who are your clients? Are they men, mainly women, businesses, individuals? Who do you see?
Well, I retired from working with people individually a few years ago and have primarily focused on training money coaches internationally.
Yes.
And so the type of client that will see a money coach, more often it's women, for a couple of reasons. One, it's easier for women to reach out for help. We're way more motivated, to reach out and get help, especially if, for things like this. Hey, I want to get smart with money, so they'll reach out for help. However, when I was working with people, I also loved working with men, and I saw that, I had attorneys, I had financial planners. I remember this one financial planner at one point leaning over, nobody was in the office, and he said, if any of my clients knew my situation, I would be so embarrassed. And so what I discovered is that people from all walks of life, men, women, families, can benefit from this. And when we read books about putting together a financial team, quite often the missing piece is the money coach. Because they can dig in with the numbers and the behaviors that are going to help people be successful, then going to the financial planner, being more successful in other ways as well. So it's been a missing link, even though I've been around for about 33 years. It's still a relatively new profession. A lot of people say, I wish I would have heard about you years ago. So it's nice to be on your podcast and sharing the news that there are these kinds of coaches that can help people.
Yeah, I imagine there's a huge need. Well, you've obviously found that in your work. So when you were meeting with individuals, I'm just curious about what it was like when they first came to you. Did you find that they were often quite distressed and perhaps a little bit embarrassed about the situation they were in? So, where do you even start?
And you're so right. So often, the money coach that they're seeing it might be the first time that they've told, how
Yeah.
they're feeling about money. And that some of the different emotions that would come up, it definitely would be fear. I'm afraid there won't be a solution for me. I'm embarrassed. Um, maybe they have a lot of secrets in their relationship with their significant other or from their family. But we always sort of start in the same place. I always want to help a person look at where they are
Hmm.
currently, but then it's really important to look at where they're heading.
Yeah.
So, that's the thing. And this approach is one where we definitely are doing spending plans and looking at their debt, working with the numbers, but also seeing what the numbers are telling us. And so many people, the way they manage their money is they do it rear view mirror accounting. I spend it so they get ready for taxes once a year and they get
Yeah.
all their stuff together. And so what we start with is a person learning how to plan their spending and their earning every single month so that they can start seeing this is what I'm planning. If they implement that plan, they can see that it'll work out. But
Hmm.
now they see, oh, yeah, but I did this and I did this and I did this. So we can start connecting the emotions that triggered the client to spend in a different way, which sabotages their success.
Yeah.
So it's one that's it's behavioral modification for
Hmm.
sure, but it's just getting clear, conscious, and connected to their money,
Yeah.
and starting to see what the numbers are telling them.
Yeah. And if they'd never looked at numbers in that way, how do you connect? How do you make the connection if you don't actually know in the first place, if you're just in denial? Um, do you find that people were often reluctant to reveal the full extent of their issues, or by the time they'd come to you, they were ready to do it? Or I guess maybe there was a mix.
There was a mix. More often, it would be they would be so relieved to be there and
Yeah.
finally talk about it. However, one thing I would experience, and I know many coaches experience this, sometimes it takes a while to really develop the trust, right?
Sure. Mm.
And because of the shame and embarrassment, sometimes people will hold certain things back because they are afraid of being judged. And so
Yeah.
they want to make sure that this is a safe place before they reveal their deepest secrets.
Yeah. And I guess if they're meeting with you personally, they know that you've been through it yourself, which means you're not going to be judgmental because you know exactly what it's like to be in that position. In your experience as a money coach, why is it that people might have an emotional relationship with money?
You know, the American Psychiatric Association several years ago started recognizing that stress over money was definitely a very serious thing. And at that point, they said Americans, I think like 72% were stressed. And now, because of COVID,
Yeah.
we know it's even more important. And I'm so sorry, I forgot your question.
In your own opinion, from what you've seen, why do you think people have an emotional relationship with money?
I think one of the reasons that people have an emotional relationship with money is that money touches every area of our life,
Yeah.
right? All of our relationships. There are people who say one of the things that will bring people for counseling is they want to develop a healthy relationship with money, or they want to become a grown up with money. They know that the way they handle money is not serving them.
Hmm.
But some of the emotions will be definitely where people feel, I know for me, I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment because it was my dirty little secret,
Yeah.
right? But other times, just think of parents. Maybe they feel, well, I can give you an example that a workshop I taught recently, one of the women said, how can I not overspend on my kids right now? I feel so bad that they can't go to school. And so I'm always trying to make everything up. And
Yeah.
so we try to accomplish a lot with money. And a lot of times we don't recognize that there is an emotion driving it. We want to feel better, or we want somebody else to feel better, especially if we equate money with love,
Yeah,
or we
sure.
equate money with bad. I mean, whatever. But everybody has a relationship with money. And something I saw on just the news, I think in the last couple of days, they were interviewing a man who had lost his job due to COVID. And he said one of the things he's doing is he just continues to wash his contacts rather than replacing them because he doesn't have the money. So, and just think how that must feel, to not
Yeah.
be able to really take care of himself in the way that he would want to take care of himself, take care of his family members in the way that he would want to. So, money is just, it hijacks on all kinds of feelings.
Yeah, and I imagine it's very much tied into self-worth.
Right. We respect people. I mean, people who look successful and are
Mm.
successful, they're envied, right?
Yeah.
One of the lessons though that I learned right off is I expected my practice to be one where there would be people like me, people who had a lot of debt and had never learned about money. But within the first few months, I realized, and I was fortunate in that I had some publicity fairly early on because it was such um, a unique business. And I started getting referrals from people where someone had inherited millions of dollars, and they were freaked out about money. And so, earlier when you ask who our clients are, I mean, it can be someone who was like me, but it can also be
Mm.
someone who has sudden money or inherited money. And a lot of people who have inherited wealth have a lot of challenges with money. They wonder if their money dried up, would they ever be able to take care of themselves?
Yeah.
So fear and just lack of knowledge can really impact a person in their relationship with money.
Yeah, in fact, one thing I would like to ask you about is it seems that it's quite a pervasive problem that people don't understand how to manage money. And if you're never taught, how do you know? So, do you think it's something that should be taught in schools? I mean, maybe it is in the US. I don't think it is here in Australia that I know of.
It really needs to start with the families. It
Yeah.
really does. I mean, having classes on economics and so on, great. But no, it really needs to start. It was always sad when a family would say, my kid's going off to college next year. Can I send them in and can you teach them about money? Parents can start even with little kids. After school, hey, we're going to stop for a treat every day. And they go into the little shop and they get ice cream and candy, and a parent could say, what, we could do that 2 or 3 times a week instead of 5, and then we could do this other thing. You want to start with children with very small choices, but you want to have them, pumpkin patch at Halloween. Hey, we're going to the pumpkin patch and you get to spend this amount of money. And with that, you can either get one big pumpkin or one medium or 2 mediums, or maybe 4 or 5 little small ones. You start helping a child learn how to delay gratification, make
Yeah.
choices. It has to start really, really young.
Mm. I think delayed gratification is something that comes up a lot with the current generation, and that just leads perfectly into the question I need to ask you, and that's about social media, because we do live in a consumerist society. And social media, I think it creates a pressure to have things to look a certain way. And I imagine it could, contribute to financial stress. So, what's your opinion about social media and
Um,
financial stress?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's just and it's not just social media, it's advertising on television, and we see it all over the place. And psychologists know, I mean, advertising companies hire psychologists because they know how to tap into our insecurities or our fantasies,
Yeah.
and hey, if you get this, you're going to feel better. What I feel is important, and it's kind of the foundation of my work, is for people to begin by learning what their deepest needs really are. So, for example, I have an exercise where I can show people who are caught in the money life drain and just picture an upside down triangle where they have a lot of pressure and stress, money worries. And then, as you know how when the water circles a drain, it gets smaller and smaller.
Yes.
So if people are caught in the money life drain, the time comes that their life force is just kind of squeezed out.
Yeah.
They're probably not taking care of themselves. They're not feeding themselves. They may not be going to the doctors. And so what I start with is to have people begin by a simple exercise of doing a wants and needs list with every category of your life. You walk around and you say, okay, yeah, I look at my home. Yeah, I have this deferred maintenance. I need this. Oh, yes, I need new contact lenses. And if people can start consciously choosing to spend their resources on their needs, and it may be, like I said, getting the contacts, that
Yeah.
gentleman that was on the news, but it can be other little things. That is going to fundamentally change things for people, because we can never get enough of what we don't need, and we can never get enough of the wrong need. And so it's important. And that is one of the ways that we can counter what happens in social media and what happens in, in advertising, because people, if their deepest needs are met, they're not going to be so susceptible.
Yeah.
They won't have that craving and that longing that makes them so susceptible to those kinds of that type of exposure.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, isn't that interesting? And the other interesting thing about it, so it can start with a little thing. I'll give you an example. I was working with a woman who just on the clothes category, she just had clothes. And I said, well, tell me about your wardrobe. And she said, it's terrible, and well, how about your lingerie? And she said, oh no, I never spend money on anything like that. So we spent some time in that category saying, well, are there events that you don't go to because you don't have the right clothes? And how do you feel going to work? So she put together some categories to start taking care of all the deprivation in her wardrobe. And she contacted me later and she said, weird thing, I have $10,000 in the bank. I've never had that before. She said, I went from not being able to buy underwear to having 10,000 in the bank.
Wow.
What happens is this feeling that will drive a lot of us, this emotion of maybe not deserving or not feeling worthy of, we'll hold things out. We're not consciously doing it. We'll hold things out. So that just the act of starting to say, yeah, I will take care of my clothes. I will take care of my shoes. I will start feeding myself better. If people identify the deprivation in those areas, it opens them up to be able to receive more. They start changing that belief about themselves that they don't deserve to, I do deserve. And that can impact how they earn money, how they spend money, how they relate to it in every way.
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier that you talked about the difference between wants and needs. And that's quite fundamental from the sounds of it to recovering from financial issues and getting yourself back on track. What about when they're tangled up? I mean, a lot of people could think, I need a diamond necklace. They don't need it, they want it. So how do you disentangle it when people have got it all muddled up?
Yeah. And they do. And that's such a great question. So what I tell people is when we look at every category of a person's life, we look at their food. How are they feeding themselves? And so they might see that they need some help. So I have them do a needs and wants list. And I will say, if you don't know which it is, put it on both.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will feel like everything is a need.
Yep.
That deep longing is so strong, everything's a need. And other people who are more anorexic type, that hold everything out,
Yeah.
Nothing's a need, thank you, I don't have any needs. So you're right to ask the question about how do people start doing it. And so what I do is I start with that simple, as you do your spending plan, you look at all your categories and you ask yourself, am I doing, I think there's three things that contribute to this sense of deprivation. And one is doing without something that's really important.
Yep.
And so as you look at each category, what am I doing without? And then the second thing that contributes to a deprivation is making do. And I'm not talking about being frugal, but I'm talking about the duct tape approach to fixing things, right?
Yes.
Everything's kind of incomplete, kind of cobbled together. Nothing ever feels quite right. And then the overdoing. Overdoing is overspending, overworking, just overdoing everything. All three of those states, doing without, making do, and overdoing, will lead a person to a state of deprivation. So we start by having them, it does take a while to untangle it,
Yeah,
but it
sure.
starts getting clear with some of these exercises. Are you doing without? So that's just one simple one. Am I doing without, making do, or overdoing? And that's why, we will have relationship with a client for a fairly long period of time
Yeah.
sometimes, because it's a process that unfolds over time.
And I imagine when the client first comes to you, or many of them, they are in debt. So I guess you have to start by kind of sorting that out before you then create an ongoing program about how to manage their money. So is part of your program to teach people to live within their means?
Oh yes, living under your means and saving the difference is the magic formula, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot that goes into that, because I know for me where my self-esteem was, it was so low, and I got rid of money faster than it came in. I usually had it spent before it came in, and so I have a process called saving your way out of debt,
Yes.
where we not only look at a person's relationship with credit cards, but we look at their relationship with savings. And you hear a lot about a person's relationship with credit cards, but
Yeah.
not a lot about savings. So for me, savings was not even a part of my vocabulary. And I really believe that it has to be dealt with together. And that's why
Sure.
called saving your way out of debt. If people have, let's say it's been years, maybe decades, that they're carrying credit card debt and paying a lot of interest to credit card companies, making those financial institutions wealthy, but completely eliminating any opportunity for themselves to get ahead. What I will start them with is to begin to think. They've got it, the first rule of holds, if you're in one, stop digging, right? So to get stabilized so that they're not doing that, and the only way they can do that in the beginning, maybe pay just the minimum on their credit cards and start to build up savings, not savings to grow wealth or, that emergency fund or whatever, but the savings that's going to be for periodic expenses.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that people go into debt is they think about what their expenses are each month, but they forget about the ones that are going to come up every other month or every 3 or 4 months or once a year.
Or the random things.
The random things, right? But most things can be planned for. I mean, really, yes, forest fires and earthquakes and things like that, emergencies do happen, but car repair, if you have an older car, is not an emergency. It feels like that if you don't have the money set aside to do it. So we start that process together of looking at the relationship to savings. And once they start doing that, that feels good. I can pay for that car repair. Oh, I can pay for that, medical visit where I have to make my copay. So everything is designed to help the person begin to feel more grown up, more responsible. And the other thing is, I always have people start tracking their income and their outgo.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be amazed, Amanda, how many people, just the decision, the commitment that they've made, they're going to track, they would come for the next appointment and say, I decided if I had to write it down, I didn't want to spend it. So quite often their behaviors start shifting right from the get-go as they begin to get conscious and connected. Oh, maybe I really don't need that ice cream cone, Maybe I really
Yes.
don't need that. I don't want to write it down. I don't want to look at it. I don't really like the way it makes me feel. So right from the get-go, things can start changing for people if they make the commitment that they're going to get conscious.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, being really aware of it and not being in denial, as you said before. You talked about credit cards. What's your personal view on credit cards? Should we have them or should we cut them up?
Well, that's such a great question. And if you'd have asked me this years ago, I would have had a very different response. And now I would just say cut them all up. But the reality is, one of the things that my husband and I were doing prior to COVID, we were traveling Europe, which we thought was going to be for 2 or 3 years. And we had to come back a year ago this month, in fact, just a few days ago. And credit cards are just, something that it's a way of life. And, people can use their watch and their phone and not even use cash or anything. However, what I built into my process is a way that if people are going to use credit cards, that they're doing it 100% consciously.
Sure.
And so, I've developed software. It started out as a paper and pencil system, and now I have a program called Money Grit, and it's a spending plan software where you track all of your money, you do your spending plans, you do your debt repayment plans, everything in it. And so, if they discover that no matter what they put into place, they really keep blowing it with credit cards, they might be like the alcoholic, the person who just says, I can't use credit cards just a little. But most people can learn. And so one of the things that I'll say, if you want to use credit cards, people don't want to use their debit cards online, right? And so sometimes people will have a credit card with a small limit that they do just use just for their purchases. But what I encourage people to think about is, if you're charging it, you look at your spending plan and see, do you have the money to pay for this?
Yeah.
And a lot of times people will then go in, every few days, and anything that they charge, they'll just go ahead and make that payment. So
they're using
there
it
are
like
ways,
a debit card.
they're
even though
using
it's a
it like
credit
a
card.
debit card, right? So it's different. And I think, Amanda, as I've seen technology change over the years, I think it's designed to keep people vague.
Yeah.
Hey, I saw an advertisement in yoga. You get an announcement on your phone that you just are almost going to overdraft your account. Well, with all this technology, it's really easy for people to be in a total money fog or money coma, where, they don't know what's going on. So it's so important for people to be connected and to have systems in place so that they are able to still be on top of their money.
Yeah, I agree. For myself, I have one credit card with quite a low limit. I mean, I could probably afford to have a higher limit, but I just don't want to do it.
And and then if somebody gets it, it's like, and especially online, I think it's really good to have a smaller one. But credit cards are very, very seductive. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in America, I mean, people aren't in school right now, but on college campuses, traditionally, the credit card pushers are like drug pushers out there,
Wow.
And they make a lot of money getting these kids to sign up for these credit cards. And they particularly will target kids whose parents look good financially, right? And I just heard the saddest story. This was a few years ago. I don't watch television during the day, but I was going to speak someplace. So I flew into this city, and as I'm unpacking, I'm going to be speaking the next day. I turn on the television, and here's a panel of mothers who had lost their children to suicide. And
awful.
one mother's story was that when the daughter was found, she had spread all of her credit cards all over the bed and said, Mom, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
And,
how tragic.
It was so tragic. I mean, short term, it's like, and her mom would have loved to have known that. So, I mean, it really is important for people to realize that they want to have their kids prepared when they go off to college. And, people do commit suicide over money problems. I mean, it's just a really, really sad thing.
Yeah, because it's preventable.
It is preventable.
Yeah.
There's help. Yeah, there's help. Yeah. And that, when I think about my life work, I think that's one of the messages that I would like to leave for everyone is to have compassion for yourself. If you've gotten into trouble with money, that was hard for me in the beginning. For a few years, I did have a lot of regret and a lot of remorse. I didn't have money to go to my grandmother's funeral, and I didn't ask for help. And, I just felt, I've messed things up. So it took me a long time to forgive myself and realize that, hey, that was then, and I did what I could do.
Yeah.
And now I get to, hopefully help other people. So it's hard to come out of denial and face it if we have money problems, but it is so worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you have completely turned your life around and other people's as well. Just back to your grandmother's funeral and you couldn't afford to go. Did you did you lie about that to other people because of the kind of shame and make up excuses, or were you forthcoming?
I was working for this company that I told you about, and they had sent me back east to a 6-month training. It was a very intensive training. And even though we were paid and we had lodging and everything, I didn't have the money to buy a ticket to go home. And I was too ashamed to ask anybody. So I
Yeah,
just made it about the training.
the work and too
Yeah,
busy.
just, I can't leave. Of course, I could have left the training for a couple of days to attend my grandmother's funeral. But, we do a lot of rationalizing and
Yeah,
justifying. And we do that to try to make ourselves feel better. It's not easy, to face this alone. And so that's the other thing is, there is help for people.
that's very good to know. We were talking, Karen, about credit cards. The other thing that's, mushrooming up around the world are all these afterpay schemes where you buy now, pay later. You get the thing you want right now, and then you have to pay for it. And there are quite a lot of ads for this kind of thing on television in Australia. And the biggest one here is Afterpay. And I think the biggest in the US is Affirm, maybe. So, what do you think of that kind of arrangement?
I've heard some really sad stories. If what I've seen here is what you're referring to is, it's like, hey, buy now, and
Mm,
you don't have to pay for it for 3 years.
yeah,
You won't, and if you pay for it for 3 years, you won't pay any interest. That's the thing. You won't pay
yeah.
interest. Oh, I've heard the most heartbreaking stories of missing the deadline by one day, 1 minute, once that clock turns past 12. And so then those 3 years of interest is tacked on, really high interest.
Mm,
So there are a lot of things like that are very seductive
yeah,
for people who are feeling a lot of longing, a lot of craving. They're not satisfied with their life, so they're very susceptible to that type of marketing. And so that's why. And the other thing that's so beautiful with this process that I have been telling you about starting to tune into the difference between what your wants and needs and desires are. So often those things that people really think they want and desire, that diamond necklace you were
mm,
talking, once they start getting grounded and they're starting to meet their real needs, take care of these little things, so often those priorities really change. It's just no
yeah.
longer a priority. I mean, you're a nutritionist, so you know about sugar and how it affects people, right?
Yes.
Just give me a waffle and some butter and hot syrup, a whole bunch of maple syrup, and right. And so just like people will get a hit physiologically from that, we get those same hits imagining the diamond necklace or this particular sofa for your home or this outfit, or this pair of shoes. And people are very, very susceptible when they're living in
Yeah.
deprivation to those types of things.
And I think also with the instant gratification, as you say, like the sugar hit, it doesn't last all that long. So you get the diamond necklace, the great shoes, or whatever it is you want. Once you have it, it's like, oh, now I've got it. And the excitement wears off quite quickly. And then you're left with the debt. So,
Something I haven't thought of for quite a while until you said it. This is one of the things I used to teach to money coaches is when you think about a drug addict, okay, part of, so they start thinking they're going into withdrawal, so they need a fix, right? And so they start, if you think of this in a circle, and when they start at this side where, okay, I need a fix, now I've got to figure out how I'm going to get the money, now I've got to contact my dealer, right? They start getting high really just before they're going to score.
mm-hmm.
And then the minute they score, they start plummeting down again, right? It's the same thing for people with money. It's like, oh, I feel like crap today. I know it's going to make me feel better. And now they go, okay, do I have room on a credit card? Oh, could I do this? Or, oh, could I take this back? And it's that same thing. And then as soon as they score that item,
Yeah.
Now the remorse and the guilt start setting in. And so, well, guess what? They don't like that feeling. So now they can start fantasizing the next thing again. And so it's just that vicious, vicious cycle.
Yeah, that
And that's
addictive
why
cycle.
it's an addictive cycle. And that's why, the healing work is saying, what do I need? And there are times in my work I would feel like I was an image consultant, helping somebody put a wardrobe together, a nutritionist, teaching people how to plan and prepare food that would feel nutritious, how to create a social life, because money touches every area. And but starting to take care of the little things. And the other thing is, when you do a spending plan, and you look at how much money you have to start the month and how much money is coming in, and then you plan your income and expenses. If you see that you don't quite have enough money, then the idea is you go back through your spending plan. You try to keep the integrity of the plan,
Mm-hmm.
but you ask yourself, can I meet this need in a way that costs less or no money?
Yeah.
And so now we start tapping into our curiosity and get curious about.
Yeah.
And that starts helping a person's self-esteem too. I was working with this couple, and their Friday nights were really expensive. They both were, high corporate people. They worked really hard during the week. Friday night was their night to cut loose and
Yeah.
go to dinner and have bottles of wine. But it was costing them thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And they came in one day, and you can't just tell people, well, stop doing that on Friday nights. But what you can say is there a way you could still accomplish what you accomplish on Friday nights? You don't want to cook, you want to have some time together. And, this couple came in and they said, we just had the best Friday night. At that time, it was video store to rent videos. They got a video, they stopped at a deli and got food to go and bought a nice bottle of wine, came home, lit a fire, and they just said it was wonderful. And it was tiny bit of cost compared to what they were spending. So you can't just say, well, cut out.
Well, that wouldn't work, would it? Taking
Doesn't
all the
work.
joy out.
It's like a diet mentality. It's a budget mentality. Having more of a plan for our life, a spending plan, earning plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you just said, well, don't do that and don't do this, the connotation of that is deprivation. Whereas
Yes.
if you say, okay, well, let's still do this, but let's do it in a different way. And as you say, it makes people think creatively. And, that all plays into your self-esteem. Like, I found a solution. I can still have fun on Friday nights, but it's just going to look a little bit different. Or you could say maybe once a month we go out to a restaurant, but the other Fridays we're at home. In terms of financial health, you've talked about wants and needs and creating a budget. So what are the very basic tips for someone starting out who wants to improve their relationship with money and try and bring their spending within their means?
And they're just starting out, like as an adult or a college kid?
Someone who has had some issues with money in the past, so an adult, and they're coming to see you or one of your colleagues. So you talk about wants and needs and a spending plan. What other kind of things do you talk about?
Well, one of the things we have them do is, as I mentioned earlier, is start tracking and paying attention to the feeling when they're tracking. So, I just went and bought this particular thing. How do I feel about it? In fact, in the software that I created, there's a memo for the feeling so that people can start connecting up. I felt good doing this, or no, I felt crappy doing that. That's my old behavior. Or I felt kind of neutral about that. Or, oh, I was really mad at my money coach when I thought about this because I think she might judge me. Start tuning into the feelings. And then another thing that I have people do, and it depends kind of where they are, how soon we would introduce this, but I have them write a money autobiography.
Oh, interesting.
And I have it in early childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, and present day. And one of the things that does is it helps people see how they develop their belief systems and attitudes that drive their relationship, drive their behaviors with money. And then the other thing I haven't mentioned is, and I learned this my first few months in business, that people who were entrepreneurs, I had to build the same process for business owners,
Mm-hmm.
because they always would have a backdoor. Oh, I'll just do that through my business. I'll just do that through my business.
Ah,
And so one of the freebies that I have on my website is called Is Your Work Working For You? And it's for people, whether they're employed or self-employed, to look at their relationship to earning money. I mean, yeah, we want to look at our relationship with credit cards and spending, but also what is our relationship with earning money? And is our work working, but the money doesn't? Does the money work, but the work doesn't? To just have people look at their relationship to work and earning.
mm-hmm.
So sometimes doing those exercises will give people insight, and in that insight, sometimes they are able to begin having more compassion for themselves. But it's because they'll go, well, no wonder I'm scared to death, and I feel like I want a bill paid every single day it comes in, because this was an actual case where a couple I was working with, she wanted to pay bills the minute they came in, and her husband thought that was ridiculous. I'll pay them twice a month. They did their money autobiography, and she had never shared with him, hadn't even thought about the fact that she had to lie to the landlord and to bill collectors from the time she was a little girl, as her parents would hide in the other room.
Ah.
So of course that had a huge, and once she wrote it and they shared this, all of a sudden he says, honey, fine. We'll pay the bills every day they come in. The fact that he now understood, she was fine with twice a month. So there can be so much that there's a lot about mindset these days, right?
Yes.
And so there's a lot that can happen that's buried, and we don't recognize the impact and how it's affecting our behaviors. So kind of shedding some light on that can really be a good step for people as
Yeah.
well.
Well, that sounds fascinating, because as a child, you really have no control over the financial situation that you're born into. But clearly, like the woman you just mentioned, it has an impact on your relationship with money. So if you never think about it or talk about it, you may not realize where it's coming from. Mm.
One of my colleagues, Dr. David Kruger, he's a psychiatrist and a master money coach. He's a business coach, I guess. He wrote a book on your relationship with money, and he says your relationship with money is the longest relationship you will ever have. He said it begins before you're born. What kind of prenatal care did your mother have? That type of thing. And so there's so much from before we were born, certainly, for our life and what we grew up with, that will impact our relationship with money. I mean, me being really sick as a kid, I know impacted my behavior with money. So
It's vital, isn't it?
yes.
Because as you say, it's the longest relationship we'll ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, like it or not, it is the way our society functions, isn't it? So you can't escape it. You train money coaches. So where are those people based? And what I'm trying to ask basically is, do you help people outside the United States or Canada?
Yes, this is the great thing. In the early days when I trained people, they would have to fly to California, right, and rent
Mm-hmm.
hotels, and now we can offer our training and our courses through Zoom and
Great.
distance learning. It's wonderful, and so we have coaches in New Zealand, Canada, Sweden, a few around, but you can work with someone. Some of the coaches in the United States work with people in other countries. Some of the people in other countries work with people in the United States, because we do have this amazing ability now
Yes.
through Zoom. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the silver linings of COVID. I mean, Zoom existed before, but now it's so commonplace. Pretty much everyone knows how to use it.
I was so grateful, and I was also really grateful for the coaches, because even the ones who had offices and would see people in person, when COVID hit, they hardly skipped a beat in
Yeah.
terms of their practice, because they were already used to using Zoom and doing this type of coaching. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah. And well, we're connecting on Zoom, which is wonderful. We're
I
on
know, and here
opposite
we
sides of
are.
the earth, and here we
Quite
are.
a few we are. I know.
And Karen, you have a book called Financial Recovery, Developing a Healthy Relationship with Money. And I believe people can buy that from your website. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. So what motivated you to write that book?
Oh gosh. I I've gone through many phases. I started my business. I had my very first client February 2nd, 1989. So it's just been 32 or 33 years. And this year I'm turning 78. And so I've gone through these different phases. And I went through this phase where I felt the only people who were getting exposure to my work were people who could afford to work with a money coach
Mm-hmm.
or with me. So I thought, one of the things I want to do is I want to do a self-help book, and I want to put as much of my process in it as I can so that somebody could take it. And especially if they worked with a friend, somebody working through it so that they were coming out of their secrecy and denial. And it turned out that way. Oh my gosh, I still get these emails from time to time saying, your book has changed my life. There was one I read in social media today on Facebook. Someone said, I read your book years ago and it's just made such a difference in my life. So I accomplished that. And it also ended up, and this wasn't the goal, but it ended up being a kind of like a textbook for the coaches as well.
Oh,
They have their
excellent.
training material, but this is very digestible because I wrote it, for the layman, so to speak.
Mm.
So that was what my motivation was, and and I feel that it turned out that way.
That's great. And also, it's probably a really nice starting place for someone who is feeling really overwhelmed and a bit ashamed. They might think, oh, perhaps I'll read this book first. And that, maybe that solves their problems, or it might give them confidence to actually seek out a person to help them as well. Karen, it's you. I know you've got another meeting to go to, so it's time to wrap up. So, what do you do to relax?
What do I do to relax?
Mm,
Oh, yoga.
excellent. Love it.
Walking and yoga. Also, just sitting in front of the fire with my husband at the end of the day. He's retired now and he's working, and we're working in this business together, which is wonderful. And we just sometimes will just sit at the end of the day and have that little bit. And then we go in separate rooms and do our yoga, so we could just have as much room to stretch out as possible. Nature has always been the thing
Yes.
that I go to. And I will tell you this about yoga. When I left corporate America and decided I was going to start my business, and I couldn't go out with people, that I was going out with and spending all this money, I took up yoga. So I'd leave work and go straight to hot yoga. It was called Bikram yoga,
Yes. Yes.
90 minutes of hot. I became addicted to it, but it was a good addiction.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love yoga. I don't do it much these days because I spend all my time trail running and other things, but I will definitely go back to it. Who inspires you, Karen?
Oh my gosh. One of the people that inspires me the most is Oprah Winfrey. I love Oprah. I've always loved her. One of the things that she did to inspire me was when I was trying to decide whether I could be honest about where I was, and I would watch Oprah, and she would just neutralize these hot topics
Mm.
of shame and embarrassment. So I would have to say that Oprah. There's another woman in the United States that's a business owner, somebody that I really respect, and her name is Marie Folio. She has something called B School, and B School, it's a business school. And, I've taken a lot of online courses. Hers is probably the best I've ever taken. And and right now, just all the brave people that are speaking up about Black Lives Matter. And,
Yeah,
it's just a wonderful time to be alive and really be alive, be tuned into what's
yeah.
going on. But
There's
there are many, but I would have to say, I would have always said Oprah.
Oprah. Yeah, there's some real momentum that's come with the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement as well, which is
Yep.
great, I think, for all of us and especially for us women. Karen, that leads me to my final question. And I like to ask all my guests this. If you could recommend two things that people could do to improve their well-being, and they don't have to be related to money or finances, what would they be?
For me, I think breathing. I mean, that sounds like, right, we all breathe. But a red flag for me is if I'm not able to just take a deep breath. Sometimes just touching my chest can be a way that I can kind of relax. And then for me, I also need to have contact with people.
Yeah.
You know,
Social
it's
contacts.
something I've missed. We're getting our second vaccine Friday.
Yay.
I get to see my grandchildren and my kids. So if you would have asked me this before COVID, I would have probably said something else. But to me, that touch, that connection, that probably feeds my soul, probably just about more than anything. And if I'm not breathing, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to be able to
Yes.
breathe. Obviously, if we're alive, we're breathing, but I'm talking about really being able to breathe, that I'm not living in such anxiety. And so that's a red flag for me if I recognize that I'm not breathing easily.
So conscious, connected breathing.
Mm-hmm.
How long since you've seen your grandchildren?
A year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
And when we saw them from across the street. We flew back. We were in Portugal last March, and I got to see them across the street. So I didn't see them 10 minutes. So I really haven't spent time with them for almost 2 years.
and they grow so much.
But we do FaceTime and we do Zoom meetings and we read
Yeah.
stories and play
It's not the
games.
same though, is it, as that physical
It's not
touch?
the
And
same.
that'll
No.
be wonderful when you can see them. And Karen, thank you so much for being a guest on Vibrant Lives podcast. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you today.
It's really been my pleasure, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me.
And that was money coach Karen McCall sharing her considerable insight and experience with us. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found today's interview interesting and possibly helpful. If you did, please share the podcast and tell your friends about it. And if you could take a minute to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, it will help people find my podcast. If you would like to subscribe to Vibrant Lives podcast, you can subscribe on all good podcast providers like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. And you can also subscribe on YouTube. Please follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast and check out my website at www.amandaswellbeingpodcast.com. You can either contact me there via the contacts page or DM me through social media to let me know if there is someone you would like me to interview or if there's a topic you'd like me to explore in my 5-minute food facts series. Producing the podcast is a labour of love and it does take up a lot of time and expense. If you would like to support Vibrant Lives podcast, I would be so grateful. You can visit the donate page on my website, and another way you can support my podcast is by purchasing a book from the book reviews page on my website. If you click the Amazon link there, at no extra cost to you, I will receive a small commission if you do decide to buy a book. Thank you so much for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.